Welcome to Energy Thinks, a podcast about the oil and gas industry's role in the energy future. I'm Tisha Schuller, your host and the CEO of Adamantine Energy. I am coming to you with a bonus pod. We're between season 8 and season 9, but I missed you already, and so I'm not that good at taking breaks. And so I just thought I would do a little special edition. And I'm going to talk to you about some of my experiences around conflict resolution and consensus building, which I don't know, now that I said that out loud, it doesn't sound that exciting, but it's actually like a very juicy topic. So I will set up with a little personal update and then give you some of my experiences based on a talk I gave this week, and then I'll sign off. So I hope you enjoy this solo podcast. All right. It's so fun to be here with you all for a bonus pod. I'm not exactly sure how long this will be because I gave a talk. It was a 45-minute talk, but I took questions throughout. So I just thought I'd hit a few of the high points because this idea of conflict resolution, it's just in everything we do. It's really negotiations, stakeholder engagement, the polarized political environment that we just do our work in. If you happen to work in the oil and gas industry but live in a blue state, you're perennially at this interface of conflict. So I'll give you a couple high points of that talk, which shares some personal stories with you as well. That always seems to be a big hit. You guys have been giving me such great feedback about these solo podcasts, so I'm inspired to share a little more about what's going on in my thinking, give a little more backstory on how I got to some of the positions that I'm at. But first, I give you a quick update. So I don't know why every time I record a solo pod, I usually have swam, and today is no exception. But it's pretty fun because my youngest son, he graduated from high school. He's getting ready to go to college, and on Fridays, he's willing to go to the gym with his mom. So I get 45-minute car time each way, which is like, I don't know, it's like sillily fun. And he works out and I go do my swim. But this 9 a.m. Friday swim has a different coach and she's really freaking good, but she's so scary. And I swim so hard that I can barely keep my eyes open right now, even though it's only noon. But usually that works for my brain chemistry. So hopefully you're going to get a great pod out of it. And I leave tomorrow for a vacation. I never take real vacations. I have lots of adventures. And this is closer to a real vacation. Extended Schuller clan going to Montana, where my oldest has, as I'm sure I've told you, a job, an internship, which makes me feel like I got the job. Because when your kid gets a job that's paid in a field that could turn into a career, you just feel like you're winning, and I am winning. But the Extended Schuller clan is going. We got a whole week together. We got all the fun things, the river stuff, fishing stuff, hiking stuff, but we have a boat. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a bonus pod. I'll give you the recap of my vacation. And undoubtedly, many beers will be drunk. Schulers like to enjoy themselves. And we have a fun little surprise. We always have weird costumes. And so there's a fun costume surprise that my oldest son doesn't know about. So I'll give you a recap when I get back. All right. So let me tell you about, I got to give a keynote for the Energy Leadership Institute, or ELI. I'm very proud of my colleague and business partner, Ann Curtis, who's one of the founders and board members and has been the chair. And the Energy Leadership Institute brings leaders from across the energy industry, not just oil and gas, but across the energy industry. And they do a year-long program. And I love it. It actually came out of a program that I had the great good fortune to start when I was at the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, called Engine for Energy Generation. That was more of like an emerging leader program focused on oil and gas. And now it's national, it's across the energy sector, and it's really kick-ass. And they have great taste in keynote speakers. Just kidding. Okay, so the topic of their whole day's endeavor was conflict resolution and consensus building. And what I thought I would do in my keynote with them was really talk about 5 just practical tips, 5 practical tips for how to show up and be effective in negotiations or conflict. And really, I mean, at its heart, isn't all conflict in some way a negotiation? So I use those ideas interchangeably because I think at its heart, a good negotiation or good conflict are largely handled the same if you're going to be effective. And I really try to think of this as going from the macro, like the big picture, down to the hyper personal. So as I walk through the 5, I'll be going from big picture down to small. So I'm trying to be really pragmatic, even though you guys can picture me standing at my standing desk, waving my arms around, because also this is very intuitive and arm wavy, and you learn along the way. You learn new skills and new ways, and mostly you learn from mistakes along the way. And so I'm trying to give very pragmatic, actionable tips in a very arm wavy topic. Okay, so my first piece of advice is simply to learn the rules of this endeavor or this negotiation. And this sounds obvious, but actually it's not. In a lot of situations, it's not clear how the decision will be made, who will make the decision, and how that person will make the decision, or a group of people will make the decision. So let me give an example. So when I was in college, I was a resident assistant, so an RA, in a co-op. And those of you who are longtime listeners know I was such a hippie in college. So the co-op was like, instead of having food service or cleaning staff, the residents made their own food and cleaned it. So it was very schedule oriented. It was, I don't know how many, let's just say 50 18 to 22-year-olds living together. And I was the RA. So I had to like manage the governance of this situation. And the only reason I took it is because I got free housing if I was an RA. And then if you're in the co-op, you already get discounted room and board. So I did this essentially as a job. I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into. But let me tell you, this co-op made decisions by consensus, which, you know, being a good hippie, I had really romanticized. But you spend 1 year running a co-op trying to make sure everyone gets fed and the bathrooms get cleaned, and you become a just tremendous, passionate lover of democracy and simple majority vote. So I had this very extensive experience of, you know, these long monthly meetings. Every decision had to be made by consensus. And at the time, I thought consensus meant that everyone agreed. So imagine my surprise when 20-ish years later, I become the CEO of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, which has a 40-person board, meets every month for 2 hours, sound familiar, and makes decisions by consensus. What? Never in the 27 interviews I went through to get that job, did I ever think to ask how the board made decisions. And so you can just imagine the just monumental eye roll when I realized that I was now charged with trying to figure this out. And up until when I got there, these monthly board meetings were famous for lasting like for hours and hours and hours. So this is where I really learned the importance of understanding the rules of engagement, because I became a student of consensus. And it turns out that as long as you have clear bylaws, that consensus can mean the absence of objection. So it's a much different bar, for example, for people to make a decision as affirmatively for something versus simply not objecting to something. So I went about changing, slowly, appropriately, the way we asked for votes and the way we narrated those votes so that ultimately we could start trying to get some things done. The second thing I learned to do in that environment was set up committees and set up a structure where committees took straight up and down votes, because that wasn't covered in the bylaws, and then made a recommendation to the board. So there was just some process, some cover, some subject matter expertise. And this idea of learning the rules, this could apply on planning a vacation with your friends. How will we decide? Who will make the call of how much we're going to spend? Like, how are we going to decide how to spend our days? How are we going to divvy up the expenses? Or the parent-teacher organization, like, how do they make these final decisions? Is this something I want to get myself wrapped up in? So I think it's really useful as just a first point of order when you find yourself in a situation that requires conflict, engagement, negotiation, interpersonal dynamics. What are the rules of this engagement? How are decisions going to be made? And what is my role? Now, you can imagine, and this will lead into my second point, for those of you in government affairs or who care about what happens, say, in a committee, it can be as simple as, how many votes do I need? Which votes do I need? And how is that person going to make their decision? So that's the first one. Figure out what the rules are. If there aren't rules, then do your best to create some understanding, some sort of theory of how we're going to get this done. Okay. The second thing is, don't call the question unless you know the answer. So you can't always control this, but you would be surprised how often you can control when a decision is made by essentially the way you set up a conversation or the way you set up an agenda. And so don't call the question if you're not sure, because once you get the answer no, it's really hard to get something done. And so just some practical tips around this. One is to simply become more of a curious student of what's happening. So let's say you're working with an organization and you need to get to agreement on maybe like a regulatory compromise or a project like a community benefits compromise. Spend more time asking, like, what does a win look like for you? What matters to you? How that kind of query keeps the doors open. All right. And that will lead us to my third point. And my third suggestion is that you really consider the players, the people that you're engaging with, that you need their assent or their interest or their yes vote, and you wonder how the world looks to them. So what's really interesting is we all come to a negotiation or a conflict as the center of the action. And every single person does that. And whatever their interests are, it's very unlikely that their interests are what you think they are. So there's a lot of ways you can figure this out. You can guess. You can guess what the world looks like to them. You can ask them, which would be my top recommendation. Hey, what does a win look like in this for you? What other things do you have going on in your life? Like, where does this fit in your list of priorities? And someone in the Engine meeting asked a great question. I had given an example of ways in which, when I was at the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, we worked with the Hickenlooper administration to navigate these national precedent-setting rulemakings in a way that could be workable, that the companies could be successful, but the administration could still have these very strict best-in-class rules. And the person said, yeah, but a gubernatorial administration has like 20 of those things going on at once. You're just one. How do you make sure yours is the most important one? I thought the question is really wise, because what it conveys is we're never the only thing going on. So if you're negotiating with an individual, you don't know what's happening in their life, health-wise, family-wise, or even just other priority. You don't know what a win or a loss looks like to them or how potentially devastating it could be. So at least trying to understand some context and where it fits into that organization and the individual's worldview will just make you a better partner in reaching some kind of solution. And of course, the clear element of that is that you need to understand what a win looks like to them. So when I was at the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, we engaged in it was initially just supposed to be a few months, a long effort to propose reclamation rules for Colorado. So this is reclaiming, after drilling, reclaiming, the 70% of a pad that you don't need after drilling for operations. And what would those rules look like? And I just thought this wasn't controversial. There's a lot of great science. We all love butterflies and bunnies, right? Like, this was just going to kind of be a no-brainer and a good win for everyone. But a few months in, I finally came to understand that in that particular political environment, this was the fracking wars, the fracking bans, those ENGOs could not agree on anything with us. So the only win for them would be if we walked away. And they could say, like, we tried, but those people walked away. And I don't even say this resentfully. I was just naive. I don't even think they understood when we started this that it was an impossibility that we would get to a solution. And I'll tell you, I couldn't walk away. We met for 2 freaking years because I wasn't going to be the one that walked away. And I think when I left, it probably just faded away. Like everyone forgot, like, why are we still doing this? But that's pretty important to understand, right? Like sometimes failure is a win for someone. And it's really important to understand that. And also just not take it personally, right? Okay. Which brings me to my 4th suggestion, which is be open to any outcome. I like to think in all my endeavors that there's a magic that can happen when people come together that would not happen but for us all coming together. And I think the same is true in a conflict, in a negotiation, in any sort of environment where you need to collaborate with others and reach some form of compromise, that there is a solution better than anything I can think of. And that just kind of leaves your mental aperture open. What are the range of potential solutions? Are there things I haven't thought of? Can I let this be their idea? So being open to any outcome, I think, is a really good idea. All right. And the 5th and final applicable suggestion I have is be really clear what you bring to the table. So in a negotiation, you might bring subject matter expertise. You might bring authority, like decision-making authority. You might bring absence of authority. You might bring charm and good wit. You might bring good luck. But it's important for you to be confident and clear about the ways in which you're going to engage in this negotiation and what you have to offer. And sometimes that can just be kindness or goodwill or willingness for the other group to take the win. If you're in industry, you have certainly participated in many negotiations for which you did not get credit for the very wonderful thing that you or your company did, because if we get credit, that's a loss for some other people sometimes. And so sometimes the best thing is to let the reg, let the project, let the community organization take the win, and we stay in the background. I even had to critiqued, in the media, like, the angry oil and gas trade association exec that I was. Rules that I had spent months negotiating. I was very proud of, but I had to say, this is terrible, because that's, how the world works. But that's what I could bring to it. That was a contribution I could make. So I'm going to stop there. The last thing I'll say is there's a general myth that a good compromise is one in which everyone leaves unhappy. While that might be true, that's just a half-empty framing. I just want to say a good conflict resolution or a good negotiation is one in which everyone can articulate a win. They don't have to have the whole thing, but they get a piece of the win pie. So that's the thought I'll leave you with. Thanks for listening. That's our episode for today. You have been listening to a bonus episode, and I'll be back with season 9 really soon. I can't believe I didn't give you a book update in the front. So we got covers. We probably, by the time you hear this, will have already done a cover contest. I have the book back from the editor. Psyched. Wonderful, wonderful industry leaders quoted in the book or approving their quotes. So it's all going great. If you like what you're hearing here, I hope you will sign up for my weekly newsletter. Both of these things are true on Substack. You can find that on our website, energythinks.com. And I'd like to thank my colleague Kayla Chieves for making all things podcast possible. Until next time, I'm Tisha Schuller, wishing you and yours happiness, prosperity, and good health.